The bullet had grazed so close to Miranda Kensington's cheek that she could still feel the heat of it burning in her memory. Even though 6 months had passed since that terrible day in Abilene, when everything she knew turned to ash and blood. Now she stood at the edge of a sprawling field in Salina, Kansas, her worn canvas bag slung across her shoulder, surveying the wild growth of herbs that dotted the property like nature's medicine cabinet, just waiting to be opened. The morning sun of July 1878 cast long shadows across the land, and Miranda knew she was trespassing. But the yarrow and elderflower growing here were exactly what she needed for the tonics and remedies she sold to survive. She had already gathered a handful of chamomile when she heard the horse approaching, its hooves creating a steady rhythm against the packed earth. Miranda's heart hammered as she straightened, clutching her bag defensively. A cowboy sat astride a buckskin mare, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. He wore a dusty brown hat that shadowed his features, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the way he held himself with an easy confidence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying across the field. It was a warm sound, not threatening, but Miranda had learned the hard way that appearances could deceive. "I apologize for trespassing," she said quickly, her fingers tightening on the herbs she had already picked. "I was just gathering a few things. I will leave immediately." The cowboy guided his horse closer, and as he did, Miranda could see him more clearly. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 28 or 29, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm, somewhere between blue and green and gray all at once. A few days' worth of stubble covered his face, and there was something gentle in his expression that made Miranda's racing heart slow just a fraction. "Name is Caleb Burke," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that needed a trim. "This is my land, but I am not asking you to leave." Miranda stood very still, uncertain how to respond. Men did not simply let women trespass without consequence, at least not in her experience. "I make medicines," she explained carefully. "Tonics and salves. I sell them in town to make my living. I saw the herbs growing here and thought perhaps I might gather a few." Caleb swung down from his horse with the practiced ease of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Up close, he was taller than she had realized, probably 6 feet or more, but there was nothing intimidating about the way he approached. He looked at the herbs in her hand with genuine interest. "What do you use those for?" he asked, gesturing to the chamomile. "Chamomile helps with sleep troubles and nervousness," Miranda said, relaxing slightly. "It also soothes stomach ailments when made into a tea." Caleb nodded thoughtfully, then looked out across his field where wildflowers and herbs grew among the native grasses. "I have been letting this section go natural," he said. "Was planning to graze cattle here eventually, but I have enough pasture elsewhere. If these plants are useful to you, seems a shame to let them go to waste." Miranda felt something strange flutter in her chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "That is very generous, Mr. Burke." "Caleb," he corrected with a small smile, "and it is not just generosity. Truth is, my younger sister Caroline has been poorly lately. Nothing serious, the doctor says, just some kind of persistent cough and general weakness. If you know about medicines, maybe you could help her." "I would be happy to try," Miranda said immediately. Healing was what she knew, what she was good at, and the thought of helping someone filled her with purpose. "How old is your sister?" 20, Caleb said. "She lives with me here on the ranch. Our parents passed away 3 years back. Fever took them both within a week of each other. It has been just the two of us since then, trying to keep this place running." There was grief in his voice, old but still tender, and Miranda recognized it because she carried her own. "I am sorry for your loss. I know what it is to lose family." Something in her tone must have conveyed the depth of her own sorrow because Caleb's expression softened. "Seems we might have that in common then." They stood there for a moment, two people marked by loss, and Miranda felt an unexpected connection forming between them. She was 24 years old and had convinced herself that she would spend the rest of her life alone, that trusting another person enough to let them close was impossible after what she had witnessed. But there was something in Caleb Burke's honest gaze that made her want to try. "Take what you need," Caleb said, gesturing broadly at the field. "All of it, any of it. And if you have a mind to, come to the house and meet Caroline. I would pay you for your help, of course." "That is not necessary," Miranda began, but Caleb shook his head. "Your knowledge has value, same as any other skill. I insist." He paused, then added with a slight smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Besides, Caroline gets lonely out here with just me for company. She would probably enjoy having another woman to talk to." Miranda found herself smiling back, a genuine expression that felt foreign after months of simply surviving. "Very well, Caleb. I accept your offer. Good." He placed his hat back on his head and gestured toward a house visible in the distance, a sturdy two-story structure with a wraparound porch. "I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture, but the house is that way. Just knock and let Caroline know I sent you. I will be back by noon." He swung back onto his horse with that same easy grace, then paused and looked down at her. "I did not catch your name." "Miranda," she said. "Miranda Kensington." "Well, Miranda Kensington, take what you need, including me if you need help carrying anything or learning where the best herbs grow. I might not know what they are, but I know this land pretty well." With that, he touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture and rode off, leaving Miranda standing in the field with her heart doing strange things in her chest. She watched him go, the sun catching the dust kicked up by his horse's hooves, and realized that for the first time since that awful day in Abilene, she felt something other than numb. Miranda spent the next hour carefully gathering herbs, selecting only the best specimens and being mindful not to overharvest from any one area. She found wild thyme growing near a cluster of rocks, feverfew with its small daisy-like flowers, and a generous patch of mullein with its tall stalks and soft leaves that were excellent for respiratory ailments. The mullein especially would be perfect for Caroline's cough. When her bag was comfortably full but not bursting, Miranda made her way toward the house. It was a well-maintained structure, the wood showing signs of recent repair work, and the porch swept clean. A few chickens scratched in the yard, and a large yellow dog raised its head from where it lay in the shade, thumping its tail but not bothering to get up. Miranda knocked on the door, her nerves suddenly returning. She had been alone for so long, keeping to herself in Salina, that the thought of meeting someone new felt daunting. But before she could reconsider, the door opened to reveal a young woman with the same dark hair as Caleb, and a face that would have been beautiful if not for the pallor of her skin and the shadows under her eyes. "Can I help you?" Caroline asked, her voice pleasant but weak. "Your brother Caleb sent me," Miranda explained quickly. "I am Miranda Kensington. He thought perhaps I could help with your cough. I make medicines and remedies." Caroline's face brightened immediately. "Oh, please come in. I apologize for how I look. I have been feeling quite run down lately, though the doctor says it is nothing to worry about." Miranda followed her inside, taking in the neat but sparse interior. The house was clean and organized, but it lacked the softness that a woman's touch usually brought to a home. No curtains on the windows, no flowers in vases, nothing decorative beyond the necessities. It spoke of two people focused solely on survival and work, with no time or energy for anything else. "How long have you had the cough?" Miranda asked as Caroline led her to the kitchen and gestured for her to sit at a rough-hewn table. "About 6 weeks," Caroline said, settling into a chair with a tiredness that seemed to go beyond her years. "It started small, just a tickle in my throat, but it has gotten worse. And I am tired all the time, no matter how much I sleep." Miranda listened carefully, asking questions about Caroline's symptoms, her daily routine, what she had been eating. As they talked, she pulled out the mullein leaves and some alecampane root she had in her bag from a previous gathering trip. "I am going to make you a tea," Miranda said. "The mullein will help soothe your lungs and the alecampane will help clear any congestion. But I also think you might be anemic. Do you eat much meat?" Caroline shook her head. "Caleb and we try, but with just the two of us and all the work on the ranch, sometimes we just eat whatever is quick. Lots of beans and bread." "You need iron," Miranda said firmly. "Liver if you can get it, or at least beef cooked rare. Dark leafy greens, molasses. Your body is depleted, and that is why you cannot shake this cough." As Miranda worked, preparing the tea and explaining what Caroline needed to do, the two women talked. Caroline was hungry for female companionship. That much was clear. And she asked Miranda 1,000 questions about life in Salina, about the medicines she made, about anything and everything. Miranda found herself opening up in return, sharing small details about her life. Though she carefully avoided talking about Abilene or why she had come to Kansas alone. By the time Caleb returned at noon, the two women were laughing together in the kitchen like old friends. Miranda had convinced Caroline to lie down for a proper rest, and she was just tidying up the herbs she had spread across the table when she heard boots on the porch. Caleb came through the door, removing his hat, and his eyes went immediately to Miranda. "How is she?" he asked, his concern evident. "Resting," Miranda said. "The cough is not serious, but she is run down and anemic. I made her a tea that will help with the symptoms, but what she really needs is better nutrition and rest." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. "I should have noticed. I have been so focused on keeping this ranch going that I have not been taking proper care of her." "You are doing your best," Miranda said gently. "It is not easy managing everything alone." "No," Caleb agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "It is not." There was a moment of understanding between them, a recognition of shared struggles. Then Caleb seemed to shake himself and moved to the stove where a pot of coffee sat warming. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "Not since early this morning," Miranda admitted. "Then stay," Caleb said, and it was not quite a question. "Let me make us something. It is the least I can do to thank you for helping Caroline." Miranda knew she should refuse, should maintain some distance, but the truth was she did not want to go back to her small rented room above the general store. She did not want to return to being alone. So instead, she nodded and sat back down at the table. Caleb proved to be a decent cook, frying up eggs and thick slices of bacon while toasting bread over the stove. They ate together, the conversation coming easier now, and Miranda learned that Caleb had been born in Missouri but moved to Kansas with his parents when he was 12. He had worked as a cowboy on various ranches before his parents' death had left him with this land and the responsibility of caring for Caroline. "What about you?" Caleb asked as they finished eating. "How did you come to be in Salina making medicines?" Miranda hesitated, the old fear rising up. But when she looked at Caleb, she saw only genuine interest, not the judgment or pity she dreaded. "I learned about herbs from my mother," she said slowly. "She was a healer, taught me everything she knew. When she died, I kept doing it because it was all I had left of her. It was not the whole truth, but it was true enough, and Caleb seemed to sense that she was holding something back. To his credit, he did not push. "She taught you well," he said simply. "Caroline already seems brighter just from talking with you." They fell into an easy pattern after that. Miranda would come to the ranch 3 or 4 times a week, ostensibly to check on Caroline and gather herbs, but really because she found herself drawn there. Caroline's health improved steadily under Miranda's care, the color returning to her cheeks and the cough fading as she drank the teas Miranda prepared and followed the dietary advice she had been given. But it was Caleb who occupied more and more of Miranda's thoughts. He would often join her when she was gathering herbs, helping her reach the higher branches, or pointing out patches of plants he had noticed while working the land. They would talk as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, the small observations about life that people only share when they are becoming truly comfortable with each other. Miranda learned that Caleb loved this land with a fierce devotion, that he dreamed of building the ranch into something prosperous enough to ensure Caroline's future. She learned that he was patient and kind, that he had a quiet sense of humor that would catch her off guard and make her laugh. She learned that he was lonely too, though he tried to hide it behind responsibility and work. And Caleb learned about Miranda. Not everything, not yet, but enough to understand that she was running from something, that there was a shadow in her past that still frightened her. He never pushed, never demanded answers she was not ready to give. Instead, he simply made space for her in his life, letting her know through his actions that she was welcome, that she mattered, that he saw her as more than just someone passing through. August turned to September, and the Kansas prairie began to shift from summer green to autumn gold. Miranda had been coming to the Burke ranch for nearly 2 months, and she could no longer pretend that her visits were purely professional. She was falling for Caleb Burke, falling in ways that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Caleb walked Miranda back toward town. He often did this now, saddling up his horse and riding alongside her, leading her own borrowed mare that Caroline had insisted she use instead of walking. "Caroline is doing so well," Caleb said as they rode. "I cannot thank you enough for what you have done for her." "She just needed proper care," Miranda said, though she was pleased by the compliment. "And someone to talk to besides her overbearing older brother." Caleb laughed, a sound that Miranda had come to cherish. "Is that what she calls me?" "Among other things," Miranda teased and felt a warmth in her chest when Caleb grinned at her. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the horses' hooves and the evening birds the only sounds. Then Caleb spoke, his voice more serious. "Miranda, I need to ask you something." Miranda's heart began to race, though she was not sure if it was from fear or anticipation. "What is it?" "The harvest dance is next Saturday," Caleb said, not looking at her, focusing instead on the road ahead. "It is a tradition in Salina. The whole town turns out for it. I was wondering if you might consider going with me." Miranda's breath caught. It was such a simple question, but it meant so much. Going to the dance with Caleb would be a public declaration that they were courting, that they were more than just acquaintances. It would mean opening herself up to the possibility of love, of building a life with someone, and that thought brought all her old fears rushing back. "I do not dance," she said, which was a cowardly answer but the best she could manage. "Neither do I, really," Caleb admitted, and now he did look at her, his storm-colored eyes intense. "But I would like to try if you were there with me." There was such hope in his expression, such genuine feeling, that Miranda felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. This man, this kind and patient man, was offering her something she had thought lost forever, a future, a chance at happiness. Yes, she heard herself say, and watched as Caleb's face broke into a smile that was like sunrise. I will go with you. Yeah. Caleb asked as if he could not quite believe it. Yes, Miranda confirmed, smiling back at him. I would like that very much. They continued into town, both of them grinning like fools, and when they reached the general store where Miranda lived, Caleb helped her down from her horse with his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Saturday, then, he said softly. Saturday, Miranda agreed. She watched him ride away, her heart full of a mixture of joy and terror. She was taking a chance, opening herself up to pain, but as she climbed the stairs to her small room, she realized that she did not want to live in fear anymore. Caleb made her want to be brave. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Caroline, thrilled to hear that Miranda and Caleb were going together, immediately declared that Miranda needed a proper dress. Miranda protested that her simple brown dress was fine, but Caroline was having none of it. We are nearly the same size, Caroline insisted, pulling Miranda into her bedroom at the ranch. I have a dress that would be perfect for you, and I never wear it anymore. She produced a dress in a deep forest green that made Miranda gasp. It was beautiful, with a fitted bodice and full skirt, far nicer than anything Miranda had worn in years. Caroline, I could not possibly. You can and you will, Caroline said firmly. Please, Miranda. It would make me so happy to see my brother dance with the prettiest woman at the harvest celebration. Miranda tried the dress on, and was amazed to find it fit perfectly, hugging her figure in ways that made her feel feminine and attractive, things she had almost forgotten about in her focus on mere survival. When she emerged from behind the changing screen, Caroline clapped her hands together with delight. Caleb is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you, she declared. On the evening of the dance, Miranda took extra care with her appearance. She washed her dark brown hair and arranged it in a simple but elegant style, leaving a few curls loose to frame her face. She had very little in the way of cosmetics, but she pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and bit her lips to make them red. When Caleb arrived to collect her, driving a wagon that he had clearly spent time cleaning and decorating, Miranda saw his eyes widen as she came down the stairs. He was wearing his best clothes, a clean shirt and dark vest, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. Miranda, he said, and seemed to lose whatever else he had planned to say. You look beautiful. Thank you, Miranda said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. You look very handsome yourself. Caleb helped her up into the wagon, and they set off toward the town center where the dance was being held. Caroline had stayed behind, still not quite strong enough for a full evening of festivities, but she had waved them off with an enormous smile. The main street of Salina had been transformed. Lanterns hung from every available post, casting warm pools of light. Tables had been set up with food and drinks, and a small group of musicians was tuning their instruments on a makeshift stage. People milled about in their best clothes, laughing and greeting neighbors, and the air hummed with excitement. Miranda felt her anxiety rise as she and Caleb made their way into the crowd. She had kept to herself for so long that being surrounded by so many people felt overwhelming. But Caleb seemed to sense her discomfort. He stayed close to her side, his hand at the small of her back, a steady and reassuring presence. They were greeted by various townspeople, many of whom Miranda recognized from selling her medicines but had never really spoken to. There was Sheriff Tom Reynolds, a good man in his 50s who made a point of welcoming newcomers. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, who ran the boarding house and had a kind word for everyone. the Reverend James Walsh and his wife Patricia, who invited them to Sunday services. Miranda was surprised by how warmly she was received. She had thought of herself as an outsider in Salina, someone just passing through, but it seemed the townsfolk had noticed her kindness and her healing skills. Several people thanked her for medicines that had helped them or their families, and she realized that she had, without meaning to, become part of this community. When the music started, Caleb led her to the dancing area. True to his word, he was not a particularly skilled dancer, but neither was Miranda, and they stumbled through the steps together, laughing at their own awkwardness. It did not matter that they were not graceful. What mattered was that they were together, moving to the music, Caleb's hand warm in hers and his eyes never leaving her face. As the evening wore on and the initial nervousness faded, Miranda found herself truly enjoying herself. Caleb introduced her to his friends, other ranchers and cowboys he had known for years, and they welcomed her into their circle without hesitation. She danced with Caleb again and again, and between dances, they would step away to catch their breath, standing close together in the lantern light. "Are you having a good time?" Caleb asked during one of these breaks, handing her a cup of punch. "I am," Miranda said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. "Thank you for asking me to come." "Thank you for saying yes," Caleb replied. "Miranda, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made Miranda's heart skip. "What is it?" Caleb looked down at his hands, then back at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I know we have not known each other long, just a few months, but I need you to know that you have become very important to me. More important than I ever expected anyone to be again after losing my parents. When I am with you, I feel like I can breathe easier, like the world is not quite so heavy." Miranda felt tears prick at her eyes. She wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, that he had brought light back into her life when she thought she would live in darkness forever. But before she could speak, there was a commotion near the edge of the gathering. A man had ridden into town, his horse lathered with sweat as if he had been riding hard. He was shouting something and people were gathering around him. Miranda could not make out the words at first, but then she heard them clearly and her blood rang cold. "Wanted man," the rider was saying. "Murdered 3 people in Abilene 6 months back. Been tracking him across Kansas. Sheriff, I need your help. He was spotted heading this way." Miranda's hands began to shake so badly that she nearly dropped her cup. Caleb noticed immediately, his hand going to her elbow to steady her. "Miranda." "What is wrong?" But Miranda could not speak. The words Abilene and murdered and 6 months back were echoing in her head, bringing back the memories she had tried so hard to suppress. She saw again the door of her small house breaking open. Saw Jack Thornton, the man she had been foolish enough to trust, standing over the bodies of her aunt and uncle who had taken her in after her mother died. Saw the blood, so much blood, and felt again the pure terror as she ran, knowing he would kill her too if he caught her. She had testified against him when he was arrested, had stood in that courtroom and told the truth about what she had seen. But Jack had friends, men as violent and cruel as he was, and they had broken him out of jail before his trial. Miranda had run then, changed her name from Martin to Kensington using her grandmother's maiden name, and tried to disappear into the vast expanse of Kansas. "Miranda," Caleb said urgently, his face full of concern. "Talk to me. What is happening?" But Miranda was pulling away from him, her mind racing. If bounty hunters were tracking Jack Thornton, if people were asking questions about Abilene, it was only a matter of time before someone connected her to that tragedy. And if Jack found out where she was, he would come for her. He had promised he would, screaming threats as they dragged him away after his arrest. She could not stay in Selena, could not risk bringing that danger to Caleb and Caroline, could not let the people she cared about become targets. "I have to go," Miranda said, and heard how panicked her voice sounded. "I am sorry, Caleb, I cannot stay here." "What are you talking about?" Caleb asked, his hand still on her arm. "Miranda, please, whatever this is about, we can figure it out together." But Miranda shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "No, you do not understand. I have to leave, tonight, right now." She pulled free of his grip and started pushing through the crowd, needing to get to her room, to pack the few possessions she owned and disappear before anyone asked too many questions. But Caleb followed her, his longer strides eating up the distance. "Miranda, stop," he called after her. "Please, just talk to me." She did not stop until she reached the general store, taking the outside stairs 2 at a time. Caleb was right behind her, and when she fumbled with her key, he gently took it from her shaking hands and unlocked the door. Inside her sparse room, Miranda pulled out the battered carpet bag she had brought from Abilene and started throwing things into it. Her spare dress, her herbs and tinctures, the small amount of money she had saved. Caleb watched her for a moment, then gently but firmly took the bag from her hands and set it down. "Stop," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Just stop for 1 minute and look at me." Miranda did, and the concern and confusion in his face nearly broke her. "Caleb, you do not understand. I am in danger, and if I stay, you and Caroline will be in danger too." "Then explain it to me," Caleb said. "Whatever this is about, whatever you are running from, let me help you." And so, standing in that small room with the sounds of the dance drifting up from below, Miranda told him everything. She told him about Jack Thornton, about that terrible night, about testifying against him, and then running when his friends broke him out of jail. She told him about the fear that had haunted her every day since, the certainty that Jack would find her and kill her like he had killed her aunt and uncle. "He swore he would make me pay for testifying," Miranda said, her voice breaking. "And Jack Thornton always keeps his promises, especially the violent ones. If those men are tracking him and asking questions about Abilene, someone might remember me, might mention my name. And if Jack hears that I am in Selena, he will come for me." Caleb listened to all of it, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he took both of her hands in his and looked directly into her eyes. "You are not running any more," he said firmly. "You have done nothing wrong, Miranda. You witnessed a crime and did the right thing by testifying. Jack Thornton is the criminal, not you, and I will not let you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." "You do not understand how dangerous he is," Miranda protested. "Maybe not," Caleb agreed. "But I understand that you have found a home here. You have friends, people who care about you. You have Caroline, who loves you like a sister, and you have me." His voice softened. "You have me, Miranda, if you want me, and I am not going to let you face this alone." "I cannot ask you to put yourself in danger for me," Miranda said, but even as she spoke, she felt something loosening in her chest. The burden of carrying this fear alone had been crushing her, and the relief of finally sharing it with someone was almost overwhelming. "You are not asking," Caleb said. "I am offering. We will go to the sheriff, tell him everything. We will make sure he knows who you are and what happened, so if this Jack Thornton does show up, the law will be ready for him. And I promise you, Miranda, I will not let him hurt you." Miranda wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she had to handle this alone, but the truth was she was tired of running, tired of being afraid. And looking into Caleb's honest face, seeing the determination and care there, she found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, she did not have to do this alone. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Caleb pulled her into his arms then, and Miranda let herself be held, let herself take comfort in his solid presence. They stood like that for a long time, and gradually, Miranda's panic began to subside, replaced by a fragile hope. The next morning, Caleb went with Miranda to speak with Sheriff Reynolds. The older man listened to her story with a grave expression, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her thoughtfully. "I remember hearing about that case," he said. "Brutal business. You are brave for testifying, Miss Kensington, or should I say Miss Martin?" "Kensington is my grandmother's name," Miranda explained. "I started using it after Jack escaped, hoping it would make me harder to find." "Smart," the sheriff said. "And I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to protect you if this man does come to Salina. But Miranda, living in fear is no way to spend your life. Have you considered that Thornton might not even know you are here? That he might have bigger concerns than tracking down a witness?" "I have tried to tell myself that," Miranda admitted. "But Jack is the kind of man who holds grudges, and his friends, the ones who broke him out, they are just as bad as he is." Sheriff Reynolds nodded. "I will send a telegram to the authorities in Abilene, see if there is any word on Thornton's whereabouts. In the meantime, I want you to go about your life as normally as possible. The more you hide, the more you look like you have something to hide. But be cautious, and if you see anything suspicious, you come to me immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Miranda said, feeling some of the weight lift from her shoulders. Having the sheriff know her situation, having someone in authority on her side made the fear more manageable somehow. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Miranda continued her work making and selling medicines, but now Caleb was a constant presence in her life. He would often stay in town after delivering her home, sleeping in the small room he rented from Mrs. Chen rather than riding back to the ranch late at night. In the mornings, they would have breakfast together at the small cafe before going their separate ways, Miranda to her herb gathering and medicine making, Caleb to his ranch work. Caroline became one of Miranda's closest friends, and the two women would spend hours together, talking and laughing and working on the various projects around the ranch house. Caroline had a gift for sewing, and she taught Miranda how to make more elaborate garments. In return, Miranda continued to help Caroline maintain her health, brewing tonics and ensuring she ate properly. "I think my brother is in love with you," Caroline said one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. Miranda felt her cheeks warm. "Caroline, that is a strong word." "But it is true," Caroline insisted. "I have never seen him like this, so happy and so worried all at once. He cares about you deeply, Miranda. Anyone with eyes can see it." Miranda could not deny that her feelings for Caleb had grown into something powerful and undeniable. When she was with him, the world felt right in a way it had not since before her mother died. He made her laugh, made her feel safe, made her believe that maybe she could have the normal, happy life she had thought lost to her. One evening in late October, as the air turned crisp and the leaves on the cottonwood trees along the creek turned gold, Caleb took Miranda for a ride. They went to a spot on his property where the land rose into a small hill, giving a view of the surrounding prairie. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I wanted to show you this," Caleb said as they sat on their horses, looking out over the landscape. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. When things get hard or I need to think, I come here." "It is beautiful," Miranda said, and meant it. There was something both vast and intimate about the view, the endless sky meeting the rolling land. Caleb dismounted and helped Miranda down, then took her hand and led her to a flat rock where they could sit comfortably. For a while, they just watched the sunset in companionable silence, their shoulders touching. "Miranda," Caleb finally said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me all the way through before you respond." Miranda's heart began to race. "All right." Caleb turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know we have not been courting for long, and I know you have been through more than any person should have to endure. I know you are still healing from what happened to you, and I do not want to rush you or pressure you in any way." He took a deep breath. "But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find something good, something real, you should not let it slip away." Miranda's breath caught as she began to understand what he was saying. "I love you, Miranda," Caleb continued, his voice steady and sure. "I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you care for people. I love how you hum while you work with your herbs, and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love that you saw Caroline as a person who needed help instead of an inconvenience. I love everything about you, and I want you in my life, not just for now but forever." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, and Miranda saw with shock that it was a ring. It was simple, a thin gold band with a small ruby set into it, but it was beautiful. "This was my mother's," Caleb said. "The only piece of jewelry my father ever bought her, and she treasured it. Before she died, she told me to give it to someone worthy, someone who would appreciate it not for its value but for what it represented." He looked directly into Miranda's eyes. "I cannot think of anyone more worthy than you. Miranda Kensington, will you marry me?" Miranda felt tears streaming down her face, but for once, they were tears of joy rather than fear or sorrow. This man, this wonderful, patient, loving man, was offering her everything she had thought impossible. A home, a family, a future. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly, and then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was Miranda's first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. Sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "When?" Caleb asked. "When can we get married? Tomorrow?" "Next week," Miranda laughed. "Let us give Caroline time to recover her strength so she can be there, and I should have a proper dress." "How about a month from now, at the end of November?" "A month," Caleb repeated, as if testing the word. "I suppose I can wait a month, though it will be the longest month of my life." They rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, holding hands whenever the terrain allowed, and told Caroline the news. She screamed with delight and threw her arms around both of them, crying happy tears and immediately beginning to plan the wedding. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb and Miranda decided to have a simple ceremony at the small church in Salina, with a celebration afterward at the ranch. Caroline threw herself into preparations with an energy that showed how much her health had improved. Sewing a beautiful dress for Miranda from fabric they bought at the general store. Sheriff Reynolds had reported back that there was no new information on Jack Thornton's whereabouts. He had seemingly vanished after his escape, and while that did not mean he was not still a threat, it at least meant he was not actively causing trouble that the law knew about. Miranda tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on the happiness of her approaching marriage. The townspeople of Salina embraced the upcoming wedding with enthusiasm. Mrs. Chen organized a group of women to cook food for the celebration. The Reverend Walsh agreed to perform the ceremony at no charge, saying it was his gift to the couple. Even people Miranda barely knew stopped her on the street to offer congratulations and good wishes. 3 days before the wedding, Miranda was in her room preparing another batch of cough syrup, to sell when she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs outside. She assumed it was Caleb, coming to collect her for supper as he often did, and she turned with a smile. But it was not Caleb standing in her doorway when it burst open. It was a man she had hoped never to see again. Jack Thornton stood there, older and harder than she remembered, his eyes cold and his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Hello, Miranda," he said, his voice like gravel. "Been a long time." Miranda's heart stopped. She looked around frantically for anything she could use as a weapon, but Jack was too close, and he was faster than she was. In one quick movement, he crossed the room and grabbed her arm in a painful grip. "You cost me a lot, testifying against me like you did," Jack said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "Had to kill 2 men just to get out of that jail, then spent 6 months hiding in holes and running from the law, all because you could not keep your mouth shut." "You murdered my aunt and uncle," Miranda said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her terror. "What did you expect me to do?" "Expected you to know better than to cross me," Jack said. He started pulling her toward the door, and Miranda realized with horror that he intended to take her somewhere, probably somewhere he could kill her without witnesses. She began to struggle, screaming as loud as she could. Jack backhanded her across the face, the blow hard enough to make her ears ring and taste blood. But she kept screaming, and she heard doors opening, people shouting. Jack cursed and drew his gun, firing a shot through the ceiling to scare people off. But instead of running away, Miranda heard boots pounding up the stairs. Jack had time to turn to aim his gun at the doorway before Caleb came charging through. Everything happened very fast after that. Caleb threw himself at Jack, knocking him backward and causing his shot to go wild. The 2 men crashed into Miranda's small table, sending her medicines and herbs flying. They grappled for control of the gun, rolling across the floor, each trying to get the advantage. Miranda grabbed the heavy stone pestle she used for grinding herbs and, without thinking twice, brought it down hard on the back of Jack's head. He slumped forward, unconscious, and Caleb quickly kicked the gun away before pulling himself free. By then, Sheriff Reynolds and several other men had arrived, drawn by the gunshot. They quickly took control of Jack, binding him with rope and dragging his unconscious form away. The sheriff stayed behind to make sure Miranda and Caleb were both unharmed. "Are you hurt?" the sheriff asked Miranda, noticing the blood on her lip. "I am fine," Miranda said, though she was shaking violently. "Is he really caught? Is it really over?" "It is over," Sheriff Reynolds confirmed. "Jack Thornton is going back to Abilene to stand trial, and this time, I guarantee you he will not escape. I will personally escort him there myself and see him locked up good and proper." After the sheriff left, Caleb pulled Miranda into his arms and held her tightly. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I should have been here. I should have protected you better." "You saved my life," Miranda said, pulling back to look at him. "If you had not come when you did, Jack would have taken me and no one would have found me until it was too late." "I heard the shot from outside," Caleb explained. "I was coming to collect you for supper, and when I heard that gunshot, I have never been so terrified in my life." They held each other for a long time, both of them processing how close they had come to losing everything. But gradually, as the shock wore off, Miranda realized something important. She was not broken by this. Jack Thornton had tried to destroy her, had tried to make her live in fear, but he had failed. She had survived, and with Caleb beside her, she had fought back. "I want to get married tomorrow," Miranda said suddenly. Caleb pulled back to look at her. "Tomorrow." "But we planned for 3 more days. Caroline has not finished the dress, and the food is not ready, and—" "I do not care about any of that," Miranda interrupted. "I almost lost you today, Caleb. I almost lost this, us, Everything we have been planning. I do not want to wait any more. I want to be your wife tomorrow." Caleb studied her face, then slowly smiled. "Tomorrow it is, then. I will ride out and tell Caroline tonight, and we will have a simple ceremony tomorrow afternoon. Just us, Caroline, and whoever wants to come." "Perfect," Miranda said and kissed him. The next day, Miranda Martin, who had become Miranda Kensington, became Miranda Burke. She wore a simple dress that Caroline had already finished, with a crown of late-season wildflowers in her hair. Caleb wore his best shirt and vest, freshly shaved and looking more handsome than Miranda had ever seen him. The ceremony was held in the small church with about 30 people in attendance, everyone who could gather on such short notice. Caroline stood as Miranda's witness, crying happy tears throughout the entire service. Sheriff Reynolds was there, having just returned from delivering Jack Thornton to the authorities in Abilene. Mrs. Chen and Reverend Walsh and his wife, and many of the other townspeople who had come to care for the quiet young woman who made medicines. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife and Caleb kissed Miranda, the small church erupted in applause. They walked out into the November sunshine as a married couple, and Miranda felt a joy so complete it almost hurt. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with Caroline and several of the town women having somehow managed to prepare a feast despite the short notice. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Miranda found herself surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her happiness. As the sun set and the guests began to head home, Miranda stood on the porch of what was now her house, watching the sky turn colors. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Burke?" he asked softly. "Happy," Miranda said simply. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." "Good," Caleb said. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They stood there together, watching the last light fade from the sky, and Miranda realized that she was finally home. Not just in this place, but in this life with this man. All the running, all the fear, all the pain had led her here, to this moment, and it had been worth it. The first years of their marriage were the happiest Miranda had ever known. She and Caleb worked together to make the ranch prosper, combining his knowledge of the land and cattle with her skills at managing finances and growing herbs that she could sell. She established a larger herb garden near the house, carefully cultivating both common and rare medicinal plants. Caroline continued to live with them, though as her health fully returned, she became more active in town, eventually catching the eye of a young banker named Thomas Fletcher. Miranda encouraged the courtship, happy to see her friend finding her own happiness. When Caroline and Thomas married 2 years after Miranda and Caleb, it was Miranda's turn to cry happy tears as she watched her sister-in-law walk down the aisle. With Caroline in her own home in Salina, Miranda and Caleb had the ranch house to themselves. They made improvements, adding curtains and decorations, turning the functional structure into a real home. Caleb built Miranda a larger workspace for her medicines, with shelves for her growing collection of dried herbs and bottles and equipment. They talked often about having children, but it was not until the spring of 1881, 3 years into their marriage, that Miranda discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening after supper, and the look of pure joy on his face was something she would treasure forever. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, as if he could not quite believe it. "Yes," Miranda confirmed, laughing at his expression. "In about 7 months, if my calculations are correct." Caleb picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down and started fussing over whether he should have done that, whether it might hurt the baby. Miranda laughed and assured him that she was not made of glass, that pregnant women were quite sturdy actually, but his concern was endearing. The pregnancy went smoothly, with Miranda using her knowledge of herbs to manage the minor discomforts. Caroline visited often, excited about becoming an aunt, and the women of Salina rallied around Miranda, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and general support. In December of 1881, on a snowy night just before Christmas, Miranda went into labor. Caleb was beside himself with worry, but Dr. Morrison, the town physician who had come out to the ranch, assured him that everything was proceeding normally. Caroline stayed too, helping Miranda through the long hours of labor. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Miranda delivered a healthy baby boy. When Dr. Morrison placed the squalling infant in her arms, Miranda felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. The baby had dark hair like both his parents and his father's storm-colored eyes. "What should we name him?" Caleb asked, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at his son. "Charles," Miranda said immediately. "Charles Burke, after your father." Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "He would have been so proud," he said softly, "and so honored." Little Charles was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to know he was deeply loved. Caleb was a devoted father, taking to fatherhood with the same steady competence he brought to everything else. Miranda would often find him in the nursery late at night, just watching their son sleep, a look of wonder on his face. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret Rose, whom they called Maggie. She had her mother's dark brown hair and her father's smile, and she was a spirited child from the moment she was born. Where Charles was thoughtful and careful, Maggie was bold and curious, always getting into things she should not. The ranch continued to prosper. Caleb's reputation as an honest and skilled rancher grew, and he was able to buy additional land, expanding their holdings. Miranda's medicines had become well known not just in Salina but in surrounding towns, and she had a steady income from her work. But more than the material success, it was the life they built together that mattered. Summer evenings spent on the porch watching their children play. Winter nights around the fire telling stories. The daily rhythm of work and rest, of challenges overcome together, of small joys accumulated into a life well lived. Caroline and Thomas eventually had 3 children of their own, and the cousins grew up together, spending long summer days at the ranch and creating the kind of childhood memories that would last a lifetime. Sunday dinners at the ranch became a tradition, with Caroline and Thomas and their children making the trip from town, and the house would be filled with laughter and love. Miranda sometimes thought back to that day when she had been gathering herbs in Caleb's field, terrified and alone, just trying to survive. She thought about how he had told her to take what she needed, including him, and how she had been too scared to understand what he was really offering. A life, a love, a future beyond her wildest dreams. Jack Thornton had been convicted and hanged for his crimes, giving Miranda the closure she needed to finally let go of that fear. She had received a letter from the prosecutor in Abilene, thanking her for her testimony and letting her know that justice had been served. Miranda had kept the letter, not as a reminder of those dark days, but as proof that standing up for what was right, even when it was terrifying, mattered. As the years passed, Miranda and Caleb grew older together, their love deepening with time. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good years, and supported each other through difficult ones. They watched their children grow into fine adults, Charles becoming a rancher like his father and Maggie surprising everyone by becoming a teacher. When Charles brought home a young woman named Sarah and announced his intention to marry, Miranda saw in her son's eyes the same look Caleb had once had when looking at her. Love, pure and simple and real. And when Maggie fell for the new doctor who had come to Selena, a kind young man named David, Miranda and Caleb welcomed him into their family with open arms. They became grandparents, and then grandparents several times over. The ranch house that had once seemed too big for just the two of them was constantly filled with the sounds of visiting grandchildren. Caleb built a tire swing in the old oak tree near the house, and Miranda taught her grandchildren about herbs, passing on the knowledge her own mother had given her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Miranda back to the spot where he had proposed, the hill overlooking the prairie. They were older now, with threads of silver in their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of sun and laughter. But when Caleb looked at Miranda, she still saw the same love in his eyes that had been there the day they married. 20 years, Caleb said, shaking his head in wonder. Has it really been that long? 20 of the best years of my life, Miranda said, leaning against him. Do you remember when I was so scared that night I tried to run? I remember, Caleb said. I also remember thinking that I would do anything, absolutely anything, to convince you to stay. I am glad you did, Miranda said. I am glad you were stubborn and refused to let me run away from the best thing that ever happened to me. They sat together on that hill, watching the sunset just as they had 2 decades before, and Miranda reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first meeting in the field, through danger and fear and uncertainty, to this moment of perfect peace and contentment, the ranch passed to Charles when Caleb decided he was ready to step back from the day-to-day operations. Caleb was in his mid-50s by then, still strong and healthy but ready to enjoy a slower pace. He and Miranda took more time for each other, taking trips to visit Maggie and her family in Denver, spending long afternoons working in the garden together, enjoying the fruits of the life they had built. On a warm summer evening in 1898, when Miranda was 54 and Caleb was 59, they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Charles and Sarah's 4 children, Maggie and David's 3, all running and laughing in the golden light of evening. We did good, Caleb said, reaching over to take Miranda's hand. We did, Miranda agreed, lacing her fingers through his. Better than I ever dreamed possible. I love you, Miranda Burke, Caleb said, just as he had said thousands of times over their years together. I loved you from the moment I saw you gathering herbs in my field, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Miranda replied, squeezing his hand. You saved me, Caleb, not just from Jack Thornton, but from a life of fear and loneliness. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, Caleb said. You brought life and love and purpose to this ranch, to Caroline, to me. You made this house a home. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the prairie they both loved, surrounded by the family they had created together. And Miranda thought about that day so long ago when a young, scared woman had been gathering herbs in a field, and a cowboy had told her to take what she needed. She had taken everything. The herbs, the land, the love, the life. And in return, she had given everything she had. Her heart, her trust, her future. And it had been the best trade she could have ever made. Years continued to pass, gentle and sweet. Caleb and Miranda grew old together in the house they had made into a home. They watched their grandchildren grow up and begin families of their own, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and marveled at how their love had created this vast network of life and connection. When Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Miranda grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been married for 34 years, and every single day had been a gift. She buried him on the hill where he had proposed, where they had spent so many evenings watching sunsets together. Miranda lived another 5 years after Caleb's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to make her medicines almost until the end, teaching her knowledge to any who wanted to learn. Maggie's daughter Emma showed particular aptitude, and Miranda spent hours with her, passing on not just recipes but the philosophy behind healing, the importance of listening to patients, of treating the whole person rather than just the symptoms. On a spring morning in 1913, Miranda passed away quietly in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Caleb for so many years. She was 69 years old. Her children found her with a peaceful expression on her face, and on her finger, the ruby ring Caleb had given her when he proposed still shone bright. They buried her next to Caleb on the hill, under a shared headstone that reads simply, "Caleb and Miranda Burke, they loved well." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, with each new owner adding their own chapter to the story. But the herb garden that Miranda had planted continued to thrive, lovingly tended by daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, the Burke family would gather on that hill where Caleb and Miranda were buried and remember the love story that had started it all. The story of a frightened young woman gathering herbs in a field, and a cowboy who had seen her not as a trespasser, but as a gift, who had told her to take what she needed, never imagining that what she needed was him, all of him, forever. And how that simple act of generosity and openness had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. It was a story told at family gatherings, whispered to children as a bedtime tale, held up as an example of what real love looked like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but true and deep and lasting. A love built on trust and respect and the daily choice to stand together against whatever came. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered across the Kansas prairie, those who knew the story would swear they could feel it still, that love, lingering in the land, in the herb garden that still grew near the house, in the old oak tree with its tire swing, in the hill where two people were buried side by side, their journey complete, their love eternal. The Burke Ranch stood as a testament to what could grow from a single moment of kindness, from one person reaching out to another and saying, "I see you. I value you. Take what you need." And how sometimes, what we need most is not things but connection, not possessions but love, not safety but the courage to be vulnerable enough to let someone in. Miranda had been gathering herbs that day, looking for plants to help her survive. But what she had found instead was a life, a love, a home. She had found Caleb, who had offered himself freely, never demanding, never taking, just offering. And in accepting that offer, in taking the risk to stay and love and build a life, she had found everything she had never known to wish for. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in Salina, some on the ranch, others in town. They carried forward the values that Caleb and Miranda had instilled in their children: honesty, hard work, kindness, and the importance of community. They knew the story of their ancestors, and they honored it by living lives of integrity and love. The herb garden, now over 100 years old, had become something of a local landmark. Tourists would sometimes stop by to see it, having heard the story of Miranda Burke, the herbalist who had helped heal a community. The current generation of Burkes welcomed visitors, sharing the story of how it all began and pointing out descendants of the original plants Miranda had gathered and cultivated. In the local historical society, there was a small exhibit about Miranda's medicines. bottles she had used, notebooks where she had recorded recipes and observations, testimonials from people she had helped. It was a modest display, but it captured something important: the way one person's knowledge and compassion could ripple outward, touching hundreds of lives. The church in Salina still stood, and in its records were the marriage certificates of Caleb and Miranda Burke and their descendants. The town itself had changed over the years, growing and modernizing, but it retained a sense of community that traced back to those early days when people like Caleb and Miranda had built something lasting. And so the story ended where all good stories should end, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, of love given and returned, of a legacy that continued through generations. Caleb and Miranda Burke had found each other on a summer morning in 1878, two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. They had built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered, and when they died, they left behind not just property or possessions, but something far more valuable: a family that knew how to love, a community that had been touched by their kindness, and a story that reminded everyone who heard it that taking a chance on love was always worth the risk. The fields where Miranda had once gathered herbs still bloomed each spring with yarrow and elderflower and chamomile. The hill where Caleb had proposed still offered the same sweeping view of the Kansas prairie. The house they had filled with laughter and children and love still stood solid and strong. And in all of these places, if you knew how to look, you could still see the evidence of their love, as real and enduring as the land itself.